Welcome to Regulated and Relational, a bi-monthly podcast brought to you by the Attachment and Trauma Network. Today, Julie and Ginger are chatting with Sheri Crayer, and they explore the growing wave of vicarious trauma, moral injury, and systemic despair among school staff, and why the solution lies beyond individual self-care. Let's listen to their conversation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Regulated and Relational, our podcast produced by the Attachment and Trauma Network. I'm Julie Bean.
And I'm Ginger Healy.
And we're excited to share with you from our personal experiences and our professional knowledge what it truly means to be attachment-focused, trauma-informed, and how we can help children impacted by early childhood trauma. We're excited to introduce you to our special guest today, Sheri. Ginger, can you tell everybody a little bit more about Sheri Crayer?
Yes, I am so happy to do that. I've really been looking forward to this interview. I know our listeners are going to get so much out of it. Sheri Crayer is a licensed clinical social worker with 20 years of mental health experience. She works for the Genesee Valley BOCES as the trauma, illness, and grief coordinator for 24. That number blows me away. 24 school districts. In this role, Sheri coordinates crisis response teams during school emergencies and critical incidents, which require mental health first aid. Sheri also provides comprehensive training to staff and administration on trauma-informed care, critical incident preparedness, suicide assessment and intervention, and threat assessment. She is also the Employee Assistance Program Coordinator and helps hundreds of teachers and school staff cope with the struggles and despair of working in the field of education today. She was raised by a high school teacher and cares deeply about public education and the well-being of staff and students. She served on several regional committees addressing trauma and mental health, with a focus on creating systemic solutions for community well-being. She provides individual and group supervision for school social workers, and she also has a private practice where she helps individuals with depression, anxiety, bereavement, and life transitions. And I had this great, when Sheri and I were in Atlanta, Sheri pulled me aside and says, "I'm going to talk to you." And you had me hooked, Sheri. You were so passionate about this topic that I said, let's get this on a podcast. So I'm so welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about this topic of despair now that we've told you that Sheri is passionate about despair. She's not passionate about despair. She's passionate about understanding and, understanding the reasons behind it and transforming that despair based on what you've seen in the educators, especially as of late. So tell us more about this. How did you get to this topic and this passion?
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. And I do, love to talk about this everywhere I go. And everywhere I talk about it, it ends up like resonating deeply with people, which makes me think that I'm onto something. Yeah. And so
yeah,
I think the way it kind of happened was really organically. I'm a very curious person, and I've been doing therapy and EAP with school staff for a really long time. And over the last bunch of years, especially like pandemic and whatnot, I was noticing people coming in, staff, teachers, even administrators coming in with just this new level of stress or burnout or, something that was happening. And, I'm a pretty skilled therapist. And so I can handle these things. And I was just noticing that all the tools in the toolbox, like it just wasn't working. Like there was something else happening. And so I started to get really curious about it. Because I was also experiencing like almost like this new level of, I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know what it was, but I'm baseline a pretty joyful person. And so for me to be feeling kind of like dull and numb and disconnected and just not interested in a lot of things, I was looking for answers for myself as well. And that's when I stumbled upon the work of Joanna Macy. Joanna Macy, I'm not going to give you a whole bio. She did just pass away last week at the age of 93, and she was an amazing. Um, uh, she's a scholar, a Buddhist, an activist, and what she noticed was what I was noticing. Back in the 70s, she was noticing all of these people that were involved in very like heart forward work, doing activism, social justice, environmental stuff, that they were getting, they were falling into these states of disengagement because of how big the problem was, that they would kind of like fizzle out and fall into this state of despair. And that word, I was like, that's it, it's despair. Because the problem was so big. And so she said, we need these people. We can't have these really important work that they're doing, and that the people that are so passionate about this, like we need them engaged in the world.
Yes.
So she got curious about how could we create a process to help people to really honor the pain that they're going through, and honor the challenges that they're up against, but then stay engaged and actually be even more passionate about what they're doing.
Right.
So I myself went to her work, it used to be called Despair Work, but now it's called The Work That Reconnects. I went to a 4-day retreat, of course, with like, the intent to just bring that work back home so I could help other people. I wept for 2 straight days.
Wow.
Wow.
And it was like the first time, I think, since the pandemic that I'd really, I'm the one that's holding space for everybody else,
Right.
like I'm the therapist, I'm the trauma response person. And it was the first time that I was around a lot of people that were my peers, and we were really witnessing each other's experience. And fortunately, the second 2 days I got really enlivened, which was great. And I did bring the work back. And so, yeah, I started getting curious about what was happening in schools, and if in fact our educators were experiencing despair. So I started doing a little research about that. Um, do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just on the edge of my seat and I'm nodding my head off because I'm feeling it all. And yeah, I want more. But Julie, did you have a question?
Just just to please keep going, because
Yeah.
you're not surprising us or probably our listeners that educators are right there with you at that cliff of despair, really.
Yes. Well, yes, because once I get on a roll, I just keep going with this.
Well, we're ears wide open here.
Sure. So, so I started doing some research, and I mean, this was kind of all happening at the same time, the work I was doing with myself and the work I was noticing. And I started to learn about this topic, this thing called moral injury. And when I heard it, I was like, I think that this has something to do with it. And so many people don't know what moral injury is. It was originally uh, named in the 90s, some research that was being done with Vietnam veterans. And then the research was being done with first responders. And so moral injury is when it's a work-related post-traumatic stress disorder that through the course, the duties of your job or your profession or your work, you either perpetrate something, you witness something, or you fail to stop something that goes against your morals or your values or your beliefs. And so what happens is when people experience moral injury, it like hurts your soul. It's really, really painful. And all the original research was with people in wartime situations. And often those were like single incident events. During the pandemic, they expanded the concept of moral injury, the research into healthcare workers. So you think like who gets the ventilator, right? Like that's a moral injury for a healthcare provider. And so I started thinking, I think I'm hearing instances of moral injury people that are coming in for therapy and they're describing situations and how painful it is for them and how helpless they feel and how betrayed they feel by their institution or their school or their administrator. And I'm like, I think educators are experiencing moral injury. And there wasn't a lot of research on it. So I embarked on a little project with the support of my very supportive supervisor at BOCES. She really like lets me do whatever I think is appropriate. So yeah, I started, I got a couple schools that I had good relationships with administrators who wanted to participate. And so I kind of paired these two ideas that had never really been done together. So this idea of studying, well, I also was looking at vicarious trauma too, because I think that there's both of that happening with educators.
Very applicable,
And
yeah.
I think more people know what vicarious trauma is, so I won't explain it. But what I did is I would take a group of staff and I would administer a morale, I called it a morale questionnaire, which included standardized questions that measured vicarious trauma along with the standardized moral injury survey, which was developed by the National Center for PTSD. So I would administer that. And then we would do the work that reconnects by Joanna Macy. We would do some of her work in the schools, which involves, but we can talk more about that. I'm sure you're going to ask me some questions. We would do that work.
Yes.
And then I would do some surveys afterwards about how the work maybe impacted their symptoms or what they're experiencing. And wow, it was really gratifying to just see how something so simple in a way, something so simple as, being in a space where you're allowed to talk about how painful the work is that you're doing in a way that you're really deeply honored and witnessed, and how that makes a difference.
I love that word witness. It says so much. It just holds space for this. You're not alone and you're not crazy. You're not, this is what's happening and you don't have to heal alone type of a thing. The witness, that is just powerful to me.
So Sheri, you're talking about teachers who used to love their job, the educators who used to, they were wanting to be teachers. They had embraced this as a vocation, but now all of a sudden they felt like something was wrong with them, and to me that dovetails really well statistically to what we know happened after COVID with so many educators leaving the profession. So you're definitely on to something here. Talk to us more about this, please.
Yeah, I was noticing people coming in with so much, they felt, I think, a lot of shame too. Honestly, I think that a lot of, whether it was a teacher, administrator, whoever it was, they were coming in and they were like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I handle this? I love this. I wanted to do this. Why can't I handle it? And there were so many people coming in that way. And again, remember, I was also kind of feeling that way too, even though I'd always been quite capable. And so I think that the straw that sort of broke the camel's back for me was when I do a lot of professional development for schools, and I'm happy to do it. But an administrator came to me and said, could you do like a little self-care workshop because our staff seem to really be like in a bad mood, like they're struggling. And I just said, no, like I'm not doing one more self-care professional development because this isn't about self-care. This isn't an individual failure of fortitude. There's something bigger going on here. Right. And that is also, part of like what made me curious about what's happening systemically that's creating this like just so many people that are really struggling at a level I've never seen before. And so that's when I started. I mean, of course I said yes.
Yeah.
I didn't say the no out loud, but when I showed up to do the training, I didn't give the training that they thought I was going to get.
Right. It wasn't the self-care that he thought he was going to get.
Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of when I really started talking about vicarious trauma and moral injury and about how, the despair is is your pain. Joanna Macy says despair is pain for the world. Despair is this pain for the bigger, broader issues that are happening that you don't, as an individual, have control over. But despair can be healed in community with each other. And that's what all of her work is about. And so that's what I started doing. I started focusing more on, rather than individual struggles, thinking about the struggle as a system. Like how are educational systems struggling? How are they failing our staff? Like how are they failing the adults that have shown up and wanted to help students, and now they're feeling so much pain and shame, and they're burned out and they're numb, and they don't have any energy for their own children or their spouses, let alone go having fun in life.
Yeah, right.
And so it's just, I really started kind of thinking about this in a broader scope.
Well, I think this is like the moment, because how many times do I hear educators say it's not going to get fixed with just a strategy or a day off, it's
Yes.
so much bigger than that. And you just hit it. This is systemic problem. But I think we know that, but then I think we get stuck. Well, that feels really big, really heavy, and I'm not the administrator, so that's where I want you to go next, is the now what. And I know that there are barriers to this too that you'll also talk about, but like I am on the edge of my seat going, this is what we need to hear, and where do we go from here? Because this is it. This is where I think for a long time we've gotten stuck. So the chance to move past this is so exciting to me.
Well, it is, and it's also, I also heard, even within your question, how overwhelmed you feel just by
Overwhelming.
the
Yeah,
thought of
it's
how do we
overwhelming.
even do this. And so I think it's important to recognize like how our overwhelm shows up in so many different ways. And then that often causes a sense of helplessness and hopelessness, and then
Yep.
there. One thing that's interesting in the research I did, because I surveyed about 100 staff this past year, is one of the questions that had a really high response rate. Actually, they all did. But that one that I found really interesting, because I also heard it very consistently in therapy, was this very high rate of feeling. The question is, I feel betrayed by my leaders or my institution.
Wow,
And
wow.
and then a question that kind of like mirrors that is, I feel powerless. And so these were up in like the high 70s, high 80. I feel powerless was 88%, right? And so that was
Wow.
in the moral injury questionnaire. And so I feel like that points to something, right? That points to this sense, because I hear the struggle between administrators and staff all of the time. Now, I want to just acknowledge the fact that I also see administrators and superintendents in my practice. I hear both sides. And even the fact that I just said both sides, like, shows how problematic the system
Yeah, that there
shouldn't be sides. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the way the system is set up, and I have in one of my slides that I showed you, it's a picture of two people on a bicycle, and the back wheel is shared, and then the front wheels they're going in different directions. And I think that that's inherent in the system, where teachers and social workers and student facing people, like, they are focused, they're in the trenches with the students, they're focused on they know like the micro needs of the students. And then administrators and superintendents and school boards, like, they have this other constituency, these other things that they're held accountable to, different standards and learning standards, and all kinds of things that aren't really necessarily, like, they're not jiving, they're not coalescing around the same goal. And so I think for me, that's one problem.
That's one problem.
That's one problem, is like, how can we, rather than having sides that they're struggling against each other, how can we kind of coalesce around the same thing? But what Joanna Macy talks about is not othering people.
Yes.
And that really, like, working together. But the very first thing that you need to do is, you need to, in her spiral. So her work has four parts to it. She calls it the spiral. So the first part is starting with gratitude. And that's where you really sit down and you acknowledge what's working, what are you grateful for, what do you have, and that's that helps to really ground a person in the work before you in the group, right? It grounds the group in that work. And so that helps to kind of create a common starting point. The second part of the spiral, which I think is really essential, is called honoring your pain. And this is the part that often gets very skipped over. It gets, you think about after the pandemic, it's like, okay, learning loss, let's get back at it. We got to get back to normal. How many times did we hear that? When are we getting back to normal? And
Yeah.
socially, when people say, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. It's kind of this sense of it's just not okay to talk about how you're doing.
Right.
And that's the part that causes so much pain and resentment when there's not a true, honest conversation about how hard it is to be doing this work, how much despair that there is in the work that you're doing. So part of the spiral work is actually acknowledging the anger, the fear, the sense of lack, the sense of not enoughness, and the grief, right? Because we grieve for things that we love and we care about. And we feel angry when there's injustice.
Yes.
And we, have fear when really we're desiring to be courageous, and then our sense of lack is usually a call for something greater, within ourselves. And so Joanna Macy really gives space for people to talk about that.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really really validating. I recently did a circle with my social workers and whom I love, and we meet monthly. So this is a group of people who we already have a nice rapport, and so we did a pretty extensive honoring your pain ritual together. And oh my God, they were crying and, supporting each other. And even though this is a group of people that already, I think they have an above average amount of connection and above average level of sharing how they're doing, it was deeply connecting and very validating. And they just appreciated so much the opportunity to talk about really how hard it is and how lonely it can feel to feel like you're the only one that's really struggling this deeply. So I think that was very healing for them.
That makes so much sense to me because, I've been studying stress and learning about stress hormones, and they just build and build and build. And we, as social workers, educators, parents that are particularly compassionate and giving, it just puts us at higher risk for that empathy, taking that on and feeling it and carrying it, and it's hard for those maybe outside of that to really understand that. So that whole circle idea makes so much sense of just that validation, because we often carry it in silence, or we don't know what to do with it, and we know that there's not an easy quick answer, and we got to go to work tomorrow. We just keep pushing through until we just collapse or whatever happens. So this is all resonating to me.
Yeah. And I think that there's a real practical application in schools to this, because one of the things that I notice from administrators is they don't really want to know how people are doing. And I don't think it's because they don't care. I mean, I think it's because they're just what do I even do with that?
Yeah, it
This is a
complicates
very
the world so
common,
much. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very common experience. In therapy, sometimes people are I don't know if I can handle how much pain I'm in. I don't know if I can go.
Wow.
Or, when I work with bereaved people, they're I'm afraid I'm never going to stop feeling this sad. And I think that on some level, administrators are a little bit squeamish around acknowledging how much struggle there is, because I think that they're afraid that well, if I let them tell me how they're feeling, or if
Open
we
the door.
start acknowledging how painful this is, then where's the end of it, and what are we even going to
Yeah.
do about it?
Right.
And so,
Which also speaks to you talking about disconnection. That's how we have been surviving, is just kind of compartmentalizing or disconnecting or numbing, because it's so scary to like open Pandora's box of feelings.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, the paradox, though, is that what happens when the pain is not acknowledged is that, first of all, people feel alone, and then they feel like there's something wrong with them, and all of those things, which we already talked about. But from a systems perspective, a lot of resentment gets built. People feel very unseen. They feel angry. They feel unacknowledged. They feel kind of alone, like systemically. And it's interesting because, you know, educators are, like we said, they're not there for the money. They're highly motivated by acknowledgement and appreciation.
Right.
And
Right.
what I notice, because I work with a lot of schools, and it's all like doing like family therapy and, like 24 different places, which is really interesting for me because every one has a different culture. These are all very small districts, by the way. I work in a rural area. And so I noticed that administrators who have a high level of empathy and have the ability to have conversations with their staff about painful things, that the staff morale in those districts is way higher.
Yeah.
And it just makes such a difference if an administrator can walk down to a teacher's office and say, "Hey, I know you had to call Child Protective Services today, and I know that you had to have a really painful conversation with that child, and then with the parent, and then with the worker. And, that was a really hard thing that you had to do. And I'm so grateful that you did that. And I'm so glad that you're here. And thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of our students." That action of acknowledging how hard it is, acknowledging how painful it is a very protective factor.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And so if we could teach, especially administrators, how to not be afraid to acknowledge how painful things are, then actually what's going to happen is that there is kind of a bottom to the despair, because it resolves the despair.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
It's this really interesting paradox, and so
Yeah.
it's just so
Right.
interesting. And I think that one thing could make a huge difference. And that's only like the second step of the spiral.
Yeah, exactly. No, but like you said, it is a very important step that we shouldn't gloss over.
No, and I think has to be done like sequential. Is it sequential? I mean, it makes sense to me that like you cannot get to the next step until you go through it, because you can't go around the pain. This honoring is like facing it head on rather than, avoiding or just,
Yeah, there's been a lot of like kind of like, let's just, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Let's move along. We're just moving along, like we're getting back to normal, and again, like I think on some level it's culturally, it's very American to just, let's just keep going.
Right.
But I also think that when you think about like what a school is a community,
Yes.
and so the other thing that I've noticed that happens is that even if it's a school where maybe the admins are not really comfortable with doing that, or maybe that's not their habit, or maybe they're still working on it, that even having those kinds of circles and conversations with your peers makes a really big difference. Because what I've noticed is that after staff come to a circle and they work with me, what they report is that they had permission to have a deeper conversation with their peers, one that they probably wouldn't have had on their own. But because they did it, it's like they can do it again. They can do it on their own. They don't need somebody to come around and say, let's talk about how painful this is. They're able, it kind of like, it breaks the norm of just saying, I'm fine. And it also breaks, because it's not about just complaining. This is not about like venting or anything like that. So
Right.
it kind of can also break that if that's sort of what's happening, if there's just like a lot of like toxic complaining about things. It's inviting you into like a deeper heartfelt conversation about how you're really experiencing your work. And so that creates community that lasts, right? Because like you're shifting the culture of how you communicate with each other about your work and how you're doing and what you need.
Right.
In a safe way, like this, you're creating this emotionally safe space to do that because, like you said, if it's not done right, I can see it getting toxic or, becoming a vent session and just be going down this negative spiral,
Right.
So
Right.
whole attitude that you're bringing to it, you have this very calm and regulating voice, and I can tell that that is a part of it too, that people need to feel safe with who is ever moderating and facilitating, the circle or the session or all of that.
Exactly.
Right. Of course. That's part of my training, that's how
Yeah,
in my personality too. I mean, I think
it is.
it's, you know, what you see is what you get with me. So, just to kind of round out like what the second two parts of the spiral are,
Yes.
is the third part is what she calls seeing with new eyes, or ancient eyes. And it's a time where there's she writes books, there's many books about this. In fact, Active Hope is one of her books that she writes about doing spiral work with groups. It gives you all these different prompts and ideas. And so in the gaining a different perspective section, it's like you kind of take yourself out of the moment and put yourself either far in the future or maybe what an ancestor would say. A prompt that I often give is like, imagine one of the students you're struggling with and imagine them at 80 years old, looking back on their education. And what would they look back on and say, that was amazing and feel grateful for about, so it's just kind of like helping you kind of jostle out of the moment. It's a little bit like solution focused therapy, like kind of doing the miracle question kind of thing. In fact, I've actually used that in this section. After you have that experience, the fourth section is called going forth. And that's where you kind of take everything that you just processed in your spiral and you think about, well, what pieces of this could I bring forward? What things can I do? What's in my control? How can I create a more sustainable, enlivened, passionate experience with my work? And it's really powerful, and it's not like you just do the spiral once. I mean, you just do it over and over, like once you go into going forth, then you can experience gratitude again. You can feel grateful for the things that you love about your work, and then you're going to inevitably experience more painful things. And you just, that's why it's a spiral. It's not a line, just
Yeah.
going.
Without a time frame, right? It's like it takes as long as it takes, but giving permission for it to happen, creating the space for it to happen.
Exactly. I think that was kind of one of my biggest barriers that I experienced in the work I was doing in schools was actually having enough time
I was
and
going
enough
to ask you
access
about
to
that.
staff.
There's never enough time in schools, is there? I mean,
No, there isn't. I mean, for me, I feel like to do a really good spiral with a large group of people, I would love 2 hours. If sometimes I had as little as 40 minutes. So I would just have to focus on a section or there's a lot of other concepts in Joanna Macy's work that I would turn to. But to kind of, if I were going to like scale this, to bigger, to more schools, which I actually am constantly on the prowl for. I'm always talking about this everywhere I go. And so, getting more schools to say, hey, yeah, come on in and like, let's do this. Let's see how it goes. And even if I could just come in like 2-3 times in a year and spiral with the staff, that would be really nice. Also, incidentally, in the work that I did, everything was voluntary. And I do think it should be voluntary. Having people, kind of force, you have to kind of want to be there.
Right. Yeah.
And so
That
part of
makes
it too was about
sense.
me kind of like marketing it and being like, why would you want to come talk about your feelings? And
Right.
so,
Yeah, because then I
yeah,
got to acknowledge all that pain, and that's scary to me, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So, I'm still kind of working on it as far as like how to bring this to more schools or more staff.
Mhm.
But I think that it's a really, I mean, it's a powerful process. It's been used around the world over the last 50 years. And so it's been used in many, many different professions, and situations and war situations, refugee camps, like all kinds of places have used Joanna Macy's work.
Mhm.
And so I think it's just a matter of like, like kind of spreading the good word and then having some people be willing to take some risks. I mean, the administrators
Yeah.
that put me in were people that I had really good rapport with. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
they were like, sure, come on in, Sheri.
But I do think, yeah, that trust piece needs to be there because and vulnerability, right? That
Mhm. Yeah.
and so for me, like you saying, when we were talking about like not everyone, people being worried about feeling their feelings if it's ever gonna end, and then you coming back with, but here's the thing, there is an end, and this is how we get there, and you will have this capacity,
Right.
it's just
Right.
Well, I wouldn't say there's an end. That's not really
good
what I
good
mean. I
point.
guess I guess what I mean is that there's a process that's helpful.
Mhm.
Mm,
Mhm.
And that
yeah.
if you can stay in the process that's helpful, then the inevitable struggles and difficulties and pains that you experience can be digested as they're happening rather than kind of like harden into despair, into this thing that
Yes.
feels like a solid, like I know when I was in despair, I just felt like I was kind of like hard, I guess is the only word I can
Mm,
think. It took a bunch of different things, but I felt sort of like cracked open, and then
Mm.
once, but which was initially scary because I'm like, oh God, what's what's about to
yeah.
come out? I don't know.
Yeah.
But like it's like, you when you kind of break open from that hardened place, yeah, at first there's like a backlog of things to process and to work through. But then you just get to a point where it's like it's just easier. It's more like digestion. It's more like
Yeah.
you
And
process
you,
it through. Yeah.
yeah, you can say I've done this and I can do it again. Like when you get to the other side of doing something that you were afraid of, it stretches you, right?
Right. Right.
It widens that window of tolerance. And I think that was a great clarification that you just gave us because, like you said, hard things are still gonna happen. It's not
Right.
like
Right.
this is our life and there will be challenges.
Right. But
That's the whole goal.
there's a step, that going forth step, that even though it's not the ultimate resolution, it is an opportunity to resolve and put forth some ideas that are more sustainable and healthy, and doing it together. I mean, that to me is part of the
Yeah,
beauty too,
beauty.
because it's restoring the community and the relationship, and so now that trust is back into play, where if I were the educator feeling betrayed by the system, now there would be an opportunity to heal that, because now I have somebody acknowledging my pain, and I have somebody looking at this through different lenses, and helping me find my hope and my passion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if, and if an educator is feeling betrayed by an administrator, I love the idea of seeing it through the administrator's eyes, what they can and can't do, who they're accountable to, and what heavy load they're carrying, and having that empathy, bringing that together as opposed to those two sides, the us and them and othering. So I just think that's so powerful.
Yeah. Well, that's why I mean Joanna Macy would say that everyone of all levels should participate in the group
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
as
That makes
peers.
sense.
Yes.
I
Agree.
notice that schools are very hierarchical. Our educational
Yes.
things. I haven't always worked in schools, and so when I came to work in schools, I was like, wow, like this is like people are afraid to say stuff in front of their principals or their superintendent.
I
And
hear that
that's
all the
to
time
me,
too.
yeah, I feel like that is part of the systemic issue. And interestingly, most superintendents and principals don't know that their staff are afraid to say things in front of them because, like I said, I work with everybody. And
Right.
so it's really interesting, the different perceptions of what's happening. And so again, this is another reason why doing Joanna Macy's circle work would be really helpful because you're just like um, you're bridging the gap between what roles are supposed to be doing, I guess, or what people think they're supposed to be doing,
Right.
and just being a bunch of humans together who really, really actually all have the same goal.
Same goal. Right. Right.
And I
There
don't
for the
know
same
that,
passion.
yeah, I'm not saying that the work that reconnects is going to solve like the macro level systemic problems in education today. There's a lot going on there. I do think that the ecosystem of an individual school or district can be highly refreshed and nourished
Yes.
by this kind of like relational dynamic. But if you think about it, if more and more schools did this, and then there was more healing and there was more open systems, open feedback loops, that is another thing that she was a proponent of, she studied deep ecology, if that's something people want to Google or whatever, really interesting, but just the idea about like how deeply intertwined we all are, and how every person's fate is deeply connected to other people's fate and their well-being and the well-being of our earth, and all kinds of things. And so this sense of like anything you can do to improve the ecology of your environment is going to improve. It's like the tide rises all boats kind of
Right.
concept.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of like systemic things that go way up, and at the same time, you can only heal like yourself in the moment, in the people around you, and I
Right.
think by doing that, we're going to get somewhere.
Mm.
I do think it's very interesting that the whole schools, whole child, whole community model, which is really very, I would say, Joanna Macy approved, right? Like it just has, we're like really, really deeply taking care of the community in that model. And that model was developed by not the Department of Education. It's developed by the Center for Disease Control in their suicide prevention department.
Interesting.
So, yes. So it's like, here's the Center for Disease Control looking at mental health of our schools, of our administrators, our families, our staff, teachers, and they're saying there's a problem. Like the CDC is saying there's a problem that's negatively impacting the mental health of this giant group of people. Is there another way? Could we create a new model of doing this? And they did.
Wow.
And so it's like, could them and the Department of Education, if it still exists, I don't know, get on board together. But
well,
I think
I'm thinking that what they saw in that suicide prevention was, that one way to prevent suicide is to address despair, right? I mean,
exactly
it right there. And it just brings you right back to that.
Exactly. Just kind of like really, maybe in the old days, school was just a place where you learned reading and writing, arithmetic or whatever. But like now, especially like in small communities like the ones I serve, the school is like the institution of that
It's the
community.
center.
It is the center of the community. It's the biggest
glue.
building. It's the biggest employer. It's the place where people spend the most time together. And so I do think that schools have both a responsibility and an incredible opportunity to be a positive influence in the communities that they're in.
Yeah.
If you take that
Amen.
I think they've always been a community base like even back in the one-room schoolhouse days, they've always been the community base. It's just that being an intentional base as opposed to a systemic organization is hard, and especially these days, and with because there's less community cohesiveness, I guess.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, I think part of trauma-informed care too is like recognizing that the environment of the community that you're in impacts the students that are showing up, the
Yes.
parents that are involved, the staff, and the things that they're having to deal with. I mean, when we have, we have a lot of poverty, we have a lot of migrant workers, we have, you know, like just people that are not having access to healthcare. We have 0 child psychiatrists in our county. Not a
Wow.
one, not a one.
Yeah.
There's not access to healthcare, to mental health care. All of that impacts like what's showing up in the classroom. And
Right.
if we're not acknowledging that, if we're not acknowledging how hard that is, then you're gonna just have teachers that, yeah, they come to me and say, I can't do this. And what's
Yeah.
wrong with me? What's
Right.
wrong with me? Why can't I handle all this?
Right. Right. Well, they're not meant to handle it alone, for sure.
No, none of us heal in isolation, right? We are wired to connect.
Yeah. Guys, Sheri, this is a huge idea and a huge, it sounds to me like you're taking your curiosity and your passion and you're turning it into something really important here. And I just want to acknowledge that for sure.
Yes. Thank you. Agreed.
Thank you. I mean, I think like I said, I'm a naturally curious person and I like to solve problems too. So, yeah. And I'm also, I care a lot about my own journey and my own well-being. And so it's just kind of like all, wrapped up together. And,
I love it.
I
Well,
just,
and we will put in the show notes ways for folks to contact you as well, because I'm guessing that there are folks out there, administrator types for sure, whose wheels are turning and they're thinking, how should I be addressing this? Maybe I'm not even aware of how much despair and moral injury are out there among my people. And and it's important to know, it's important to recognize that.
yeah, thank you. No, I absolutely love, I do a lot of like, coaching of admins, that they'll come to me and talk about the struggles that they're having or they'll talk about the struggles with their staff. And I'm always happy to help them and guide them. And, I think fortunately I've earned enough, like rapport and trust and respect that a lot of them are willing to take some honest feedback from me about the way they handle certain situations. And it's nice because I do think administrators have a huge impact on the morale of their staff. And it's sometimes just some simple tweaks would make such a big difference, and so yeah. And I always say, if the adults are okay, the kids will be okay.
Agree.
So,
Totally agree.
you know what I mean? Like I'm all about supporting staff and helping people to, really like come back to their passion, come back to, why did you want to do this in the first place? And, can you enjoy it and love it again?
Right.
And we need you, right? You're needed. And we just love our educators. So
Yes. So if you're listening to this and you aren't a teacher or you're not an administrator, but you know and love one, please get this information in front of them so that they can start thinking about how this whole topic of transforming despair and active hope can play into their schools and their lives, because it's going to make things easier and healthier for the adults, which then ultimately does what we want it to do, which makes things healthier for the kids.
And again, we have to acknowledge Joanna Macy and the incredible work she did over her entire life, 6 decades of activism.
amazing.
So looking at her work that Reconnects website and learning about, getting some of her books is another great way to get started too.
Yes. And that will be in the show notes. And you've inspired me to take a look, personally too, because
Me too.
any advocacy and activism work, and of course we do advocate for children all the time at ATN, is exhausting in this current environment. And we need to keep ourselves strong. So it's good to know more about her. Thank you, Sheri. Thanks for today.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
It was definitely insightful and delightful at the same time, because I feel your energy and your passion around it, and that's great.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, folks, for listening in, and we will catch you in the next episode.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Regulated and Relational. In our next episode, Julie and Ginger talk about reactive attachment disorder and how it appears in schools. A special thanks to Joe Kramer for donating the music. To learn more about the Attachment and Trauma Network, visit us at www.attachedtrauma.org. I'm Lauren Cassis, and as always, thank you for listening.